Hello. Friday, 24th of January, was the 60th anniversary of the death of Winston Churchill. Hence, today's reading. Hello. More prose today, from a book I've always really liked, Bernard Levin's History of Britain in the 1960s, The Pendulum Years. This is an extract, it's not the whole thing, so I jump about slightly, from a chapter called Death Be Not Proud, about people who passed away in the 1960s. Yet death did nothing more symbolic in the 60s than, exactly halfway through the decade, to carry off Winston Churchill after a struggle which death must several times have been tempted to abandon. So resolute was his opposition, so tenacious his hold on a life which had spanned 90 years and included the attainment of a place in history that few men have achieved, and fewer still in their own lifetimes. Soon after his 90th birthday, in November 1964, he had begun the final decline, tugged along slowly and persistently by the merciless compassion of death. A week or so after the New Year, he suffered a stroke, the last of many he had had, and from then on it was only a matter of time, though the time was actually more than a fortnight, and during it he seemed more than once capable of recovery. Eventually, however, he fell into a deeper and deeper sleep, and all over the world obituary tributes were prepared, television film edited and put together, messages and telegrams written out, and prayers offered. His family gathered at his bedside. His doctor, the faithful Lord Moran, came and went at all hours, never sparing himself in the care of his patient, who little knew that his faithful physician had for years been writing a diary of his years with Churchill, and was to publish it only 16 months later. The Queen sent a message of sympathy and good wishes, and prayed publicly for his recovery. President Johnson and ex-President Eisenhower telegrammed their encouragement, and so did President Nkrumah of Ghana, the last perhaps reflecting that if his people believed the propaganda being put out on his behalf, which attributed supernatural powers to him, no such indignified spectacle as his own death would ever trouble them. They didn't believe it, though they kept quiet about their scepticism until he was overthrown in 1966. One curious side effect of Churchill's tenacious hold on the remnants of life was the fact that it nearly ruined several British newspapers, which might, night after night, had complete editions ready with his obituary and attendant material, which, night after night, they were unable to use, together with the extra staff and distribution facilities engaged for the operation. One paper, notoriously in no position to do so, was said to be losing £5,000 a day while Churchill survived, and it is possible that its management had to control themselves carefully if they were not to add to the national and international prayers for the great man's recovery, a prayer that he might, at any rate, make up his mind. Slowly, very slowly, the pilot slipped overboard. The bulletins moved peacefully towards their close. The family gathered at the bedside. Those keeping vigil in the street outside grew ever more hushed and solemn, and Operation Hope Not, which had been set up under Churchill's own supervision 12 years previously, began to move imperceptibly and soundlessly into place, preparing for the last state funeral any commoner would ever have. But first the battle had to finish. Though the Archbishop of Canterbury, at the request of the London Evening News, drafted a set of prayers for the public's private use, and though no doubt they were widely employed, and though, matching his secular arts to the Church's sacred ones, Lord Moran redoubled his ministrations, there was now but one way it could go, and duly on January the 24th, 1965, the 70th anniversary of his father's death, Winston Churchill died, and at the hour of his passing, his lifelong friend, Violet Bonham Carter, declared his face had become a face from which all age and infirmity had dropped away, young, calm, and resolute in death. He was to lie in state in Westminster Hall, the first Prime Minister to do so since Gladstone, and it is fairly safe to say, the last who ever will. For 3 days, without cease, the column of mourners passed through the hall, the most ancient of all Britain's state buildings, which had seen more of its history than any other, and was now to see one kind for the very last time. 10,000, 50, 100, 200, 300,000 passed by the catafalque. The queue stretched for 1,000 yards, for a mile, 2 miles, 3 miles. The shuffling wait increased from half an hour to an hour, from an hour to 2 hours, from 2 hours to 3, from 3 to 4. The frost deepened, the sleet began to fall. A score, 100, 200 collapsed from the cold. And all the while the long, patient, silent file wound its way on and passed through the hall where Churchill's coffin lay on a plinth, shrouded in the national flag, with the insignia of the Garter resting on it, with 4 tall yellow candles, each pointing a trembling finger of flame at the roof, and with a silent guard of honour, changed every half hour, of 4 officers. Television showed it, radio described it, countless words were poured out about it, and still the tide flowed on, of people who recognised that this was something they would not look upon again, and who had come from every part of the country and every corner of the world to file through a door that was slowly closing, and forever. It was not, however, to close without formal public recognition of what it was that Churchill's death symbolised. His funeral was one of the great public ceremonies of history, comparable with the Field of the Cloth of Gold, the coronation of Peter the Great, the funerals of Wellington and of Lincoln. But it was also one of the great watersheds of history too, comparable in this sense with the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, the shots of Fort Sumter, the execution of Charles I, the whiff of grape shot, the first Reform Bill. Leaders of 110 nations, almost every independent state in the world, attended the funeral service in St. Paul's, thus providing the organisers with some delicate and difficult problems in the fields of both security and protocol. The importance of seeing that the Russian or American representatives, say, were not assassinated, being scarcely more tractable, and for that matter vital, than the need to see that President de Gaulle, say, was not given a position that he might regard as incompatible with his and his country's dignity. In the event, all went well, apart from the single horrifying moment when the bearer party, moving up the steps of St. Paul's with apparently effortless ease, were momentarily thrown out of their stride — it was afterwards rumoured that the body had shifted inside the coffin — by the circumstance of the 82-year-old Lord Attlee, one of the pallbearers, faltering, at which it looked for a few seconds as though the ultimate catastrophe was going to occur. It was, however, the frail health of Lord Attlee that gave rise to one of the most striking and memorable photographs of the day, when, waiting for his car after the ceremony, he was accommodated on the steps of the cathedral with a simple wooden chair, and sat there, bowed over his stick, remembering. He was remembering more than most that day, but all were remembering, and throughout the land there was television to help them do so. Over half the population of Britain, 25 million people, watched the ceremony, and the direct transmission to other countries, it was subsequently stated, produced a total audience of something like 350 million, or more than 10% of the entire population of the world. They saw it all, step by step of the way, from the moment when Big Ben, early in the morning, struck for the last time that day, and then fell silent to midnight, to the moment when the cameras, perched in an eyrie high above Waterloo Station, showed the train bearing the body and the family mourners to Churchill's final private resting place, steaming out of the station and between the houses, following it on and on and on, until it seemed as though the cameras must be flying behind the train to keep it in view for so long. The procession itself was headed by a contingent of Battle of Britain aircrews, of whom he had spoken his most famous words. Middle-aged men now, yet with upright bearing, they marched, and behind them the squadrons, the contingents, the deputations, from all the branches of all the armed forces, the admirals, the generals, the air marshals, the officers bearing purple cushions on which reposed the scores of orders and decorations he had won during his long life, the family mourners, the bands, the police, the fire service, the defence corps. Yet the day was won by two unexpected sights, which were to live in the minds of millions long after the hymns had died away, the commentators and reporters had said their last words, the notabilities, unoffended and unassassinated, had departed. Unannounced, a camera swung its fishy eye towards the whispering gallery of St. Paul's, and there picked out the silhouette of the trumpeter sounding the last post. Then, as the launch carrying the coffin slid away from the pier, the cranes of London's dockland, lined up like silent sentinels, simultaneously dipped their jibs in salute. You saw the ceremony? That I did. How was it? Well worth the seeing. Next day, the Sixties looked over their shoulder. The officer in charge of the bearer party received the MBE, while the men who actually carried the coffin got the BEM. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. Please subscribe, and you can do that by looking at the website where you found this. Recommend to your friends, and I'm more than happy to take requests. Thank you.